Hi guys, this is Peace Daddy, Mr. Dollar here. We are doing the first great lesson today, and normally I would do this in a classroom with a bunch of boys and girls around me, but we are making this video during 2020, so we're in the middle of a pandemic, so we're at home around my kitchen table. So we're gonna start. What did you see while you were outside today, or on any day? You would probably see trees, sunlight, grass, and birds. And what do we see at night? At night, we see stars, moons, and darkness. Well, in the beginning, there was nothing. People did not exist. Cities did not exist. Animals did not exist. Even the earth itself did not exist. There was nothing. No stars, no mountains, no rivers, no oceans, nothing. There was only great space, which had no beginning and no end. All was dark. It was so dark that our darkest night would seem like brilliant sunshine. It was so cold that ice would seem warm. Then, suddenly, in a burst of great energy, a force brought these particles into the whole universe. The universe began. Time began. And particles appeared. So tiny were these particles that even the smallest specks of dust would seem large next to them. There was now light, light greater than we can imagine. So intense was the heat that all matter, iron, gold, rocks, water, all existed as a gas. The particles raced around in chaos, and when they rammed into each other, they ceased to exist. Our universe may have disappeared in that instant as quickly as it had appeared, but the universe cooled just enough. And the force, something that cannot be seen, but which has great power, began to draw these particles together. Protons, neutrons, and electrons, as these particles came to be called, began to join together, and the elements of hydrogen and helium were formed. These elements would soon transform this chaotic universe. 5 billion years has passed. Over the next 5 billion years, the particles continued to join together until unable to resist the force. Now we're going to cut up some bits of paper and slowly add some water. Observe the bits of paper. Do not blow on the bits of paper. Do not touch the bits of paper. Watch how some of the bits come together. This is the force at work. Galaxies appear, and as they collided, stars of great energy were born. Our Milky Way galaxy has 100 billion stars. Our galaxy, though, is not a typical galaxy. Only spiral galaxies are rich in the metals our kind of life needs. When we look up at the sky, we see millions of stars, but every star we can see is in our own galaxy, the Milky Way. Even the stars of our own galaxy are so far apart that it takes light from some stars millions of years to reach us. The stars stretch out to fill the whole space of our universe. Do you know how fast light travels? 100 miles? 200 miles? 1,000 miles an hour? Light travels 186,000 miles per second. Imagine how fast that is. That means if you're looking at a globe, in 1 second, the sunlight can travel around the Earth 7 times. If we drove around the Earth, driving at 100 miles an hour without ever stopping to rest, it would take us 10 days and 10 nights to drive around the Earth 7 times. Light can do that in 1 second. You can snap your fingers, and light has already gone around the sun 7 times. Now you can imagine how far the stars are from the Earth when it takes their light millions of years to reach us. 50 million years ago, in another cosmic instance, our sun was born out of the clumps of particles being pulled together. When the fiery cloud that was to become our sun was born, it was 1,000,000 times larger than it is today, but not so big that it would become a blue giant and explode. Its size was just big enough to guarantee it a long energy giving life. As the particles came together, small clumps remained free and they pulled away from the sun. These particles began to follow the laws of space and each pulled together. The planets of our solar system were born and they began to spin and move in a fixed path. The blue pearl that was to become Earth had begun its journey. There are so many stars that scientists calculate that if each of them were 1 grain of sand, they would cover all the states from Virginia to New York. So from here to here, if the stars were if each star was 1 grain of sand, they would cover all the states from Virginia to New York, 200 meters high. One of those stars, one of those grains of sand from the thousands of billions of grains of sand is our sun. And 1/1,000,000th of a part of this 1 grain is our Earth. Does anyone know why the sun looks so small? The sun looks smaller than the Earth because it is so far away. It takes light 8 minutes to reach us from the sun. If we were to travel to the sun at 100 miles an hour, it would take us 106 years to reach the sun. In fact, the sun is 1,000,000 times bigger than the Earth. The sun is so big that one flame from the sun could contain 22 Earths. It became our sun 5 billion years ago, and it will continue to glow for at least 5 billion more before its energy collapses and leaves our world in coldness. When it first began to form, the Earth was so hot that it was just made up of whirling gases. As the Earth spun in space, it began to cool quickly as its size is so small. The particles at the edge became cold and they shrank, huddling together as they hurried toward the center of the Earth. Then they became hot, and as they became hotter and hotter, they expanded and hurried back toward the edge, the coolness of space. For hundreds of millions of years, this dance continued. Finally, the particles cooled and settled down. The heavier particles sank to form the core, and the lesser particles formed the mantle, and the lightest particles remained on the outside and slowly formed a crust. I have 3 liquids here of different weights. Pour the colored water in. Then the honey. Watch how it sinks to the bottom. Now pour in the oil and watch it float. This is the force at work. I can shake this mixture, and before the end of the day, it will settle again with the heaviest at the bottom and the lightest at the top. The laws of the force are very powerful, and they must obey. These particles assumed 3 different states: that of a solid, a liquid, and a gas. Everything we know, every particle that exists on Earth is either a solid, a liquid, or a gas. Their state depends on how hot or cold they are. In the solid state, particles are very attracted and they love each other. They hold together so tightly that they are impossible to separate. They form a body that will not alter its shape unless one applies force. If a particle is broken off, as when a stone is broken, all the pieces still cling together and remain a stone. In the liquid state, the particles hold together. Imagine these marbles are molecules of a liquid. They are holding together, but not so tightly. They have no shape of their own, but they fill every hollow. They push sideways and downwards, but never upwards. This is why we can put our hand in water, but not inside of a rock. The particles of gases do not cling together at all. They move freely in all directions. All the particles in space obey these laws. The heaviest particles on Earth sink to the center of the planet. They become a solid because of their great pressure that Earth exerts on its core. The mantle between the core and the crust remained liquid, and it was very hot. This molten rock wanted to expand. It wanted to rise up where it was cooler, but the crust was blocking its way. So it burst out. Volcanoes exploded all over the earth, and a great cloud covered our world. When the hot particles had finished their explosions, Earth cooled again, and the rains fell. So let's show the chart of the volcanoes exploding.
Okay.
And And then let's show the chart of the volcanoes cooling. The water that fell became gas and formed more clouds above the earth. These clouds hid the sun, and they allowed the earth to cool again. The gases became liquids, and more liquids became solids, and it rained and rained and rained. Furious storms raged over the land, and the water filled in all the hollows. Lakes, rivers, ponds, and oceans were formed. The wrinkles became mountains, and the hollows became oceans. Finally, the clouds disappeared. The sun smiled down on this new earth, and everything was beautiful, and life was ready to begin. That is the conclusion of the first great lesson.